Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming and joining with us today. I'm Denise Cosgrove. I'm the Chief Executive of Presbyterian Support Northern. So I'm very excited as part of PSN to be hosting this lecture series. We're about halfway through now and we've had an amazing range of really interesting speakers, quite provocative, challenging. I've already had the benefit of hearing our speaker today, Dorothy, in Wellington, and I can tell you that it's a really interesting lecture. And you provoked quite a lot of questioning, so we had to, contain the questions in the end. So please, I'm sure that we will be just as, excited by what we're going to hear today. What we've been trying to do is we see ourselves outside of government as having a role in actually lifting and building the capability of the sector. And doing something like this is actually about bringing thought leaders, challengers, people we can actually start to have a discussion and debate and hopefully find some collaborative ways to actually improve the outcomes for our tamariki, our children in New Zealand. And today, I'm really delighted to actually welcome Dorothy. As I said, Dorothy's already done a session in Wellington. I've known Dorothy for some time. And you're going to talk to us about investing for social wellbeing and looking at that through a lens as well on social housing. And in fact, we're actually lucky because we're getting some hot off the press stuff in a way around how the shift and change between social investment towards the investing for social wellbeing. So that's really, really interesting. And you've been really instrumental, Dorothy, in actually repositioning that in New Zealand and introducing it and building a whole layer of supports and infrastructure to do the work that you do. So we're very proud of that. I'd like to, before I pass over, thank KPMG for hosting us this morning and having us here. It's a fantastic venue and, of course, the food was delicious. So I'll pass over to you, Dorothy.
Thanks, Denise. Morena. Look, thank you for coming this morning, especially quite early. I'm very encouraged by how many people are here, actually. It's a good turnout. Look, I'm going to talk about a couple of things this morning. One is a transition from a social investment approach under the previous government to an investing for social wellbeing approach under this government. It's the question I get asked most. What's happened? What's changed? Has social investment gone away? And what does that mean for the social investment agency? So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But then mainly I do want to talk, as Denise said, about the work we've been doing around social housing. So why we've done the work and what we've found, both in terms of the methodology, which was really the important factors for us, but also the insights we've been able to draw on social housing. But before I make a start, I'm just going to flick. Right. Can I just understand who's in the audience? Like when I talk in Wellington, I normally know who's there. It's a lot of public servants. But in Auckland, I'm guessing that's less the case. So public sector? Oh, nice. I'm going to say NGO sector. Nice. And then private sector. We all distinguish ourselves differently, but okay. That's similar to what the audience that we had in Wellington. It's always just really useful to know. So when Denise or when PSN asked me to do this presentation today as part of the lecture series, they wrote to me and asked me if I'd do it. And in the letter was this phrase, and it really caught my attention because I think this really is part of the ethos of the Social Investment Agency. This is how we think about the world. And we work with a number of government agencies, but NGOs in particular. We have 6 strategic partnerships, as we call them, and a whole bunch of other relationships. And they're really important to us. PSN is one of our strategic partnerships. And we really believe that if we are going to find solutions to the most challenging problems we've got in this country, then we need to work differently, and we need to work collaboratively, and we need to work outside Wellington. Wellington doesn't have all the answers. The public service does not have all the answers. So that really sits at the heart about how we think about things. So that was a very attractive phrase in the invite to come today. So on that note, with the change of government, there were a lot of questions and a lot of speculation as to what would happen about our social investment approach. It was so closely tied to the previous administration, and particularly the Prime Minister of the previous administration. Minister Sepuloni, who will be speaking at one of these lecture series in a few weeks, I think. Look, I really encourage you, I'm going to do an advert, I really encourage you, if you're really interested in how this government's thinking about an investing for social wellbeing approach, come and have a listen to her. She's got it very clear in her head, she's very articulate, and I think you'll enjoy what she's got to say, and she's up for some good questions. But I'll talk about it briefly. So the way I think about it is every government is interested or wants to improve social outcomes, but how they'll go about it will differ. I think that's perfectly natural. And we had social investment, previous government, we've got this government thinking about and developing what they're calling an investing for social wellbeing approach. I think the tenets that are in common, we need to understand what works. So we need to better understand people's needs, and I think we're getting better at that. We need to understand what services and supports are going to meet those needs. We need to understand then whether those services and supports worked. Then everything we learn, we're feeding back into our decision making, so we're continuously improving our decisions. And I also think stronger focus on prevention and the life course. We're getting much more sophisticated in our understanding. I think those tenets are in common. But I think where the differences lie, and as I said, if you listen to the Minister, you can test me on this, is this government's moving away from what you will have heard as a very narrow focus on highly targeted interventions. They are interested in lifting the wellbeing of all New Zealanders, recognising that different people need different levels of support to do that. It's not just about the big data. I think one of the things about social investment is it got caught up in this narrative around big data, which I think is unfortunate. This government is much more interested in a whole range of information sources, not just the big data, and they're not afraid of it, but things like the client voice, the provider voice, the science, the evidence, the literature from overseas. When you bring all of that together, what is that telling us? The Minister will probably put this at the top of her list. They're not just interested in measuring the fiscal returns. This is not just about the fiscals. Look, I think the fiscals are still important. I think we need the ability to measure across all domains and all fronts. And I'll talk a bit about that. But this government is very interested in understanding whether they've made changes for people's wellbeing. I think too, this is not a top-down single agency approach. I think this government have come to that realisation really, really quickly. I think the previous administration, it took them a wee while to get there, but as you'd expect, this has been a learning curve for all of us involved. So our mission is investing in what works for better lives. And our job, I think, is to champion an evidence-based approach to decision-making, but to support agencies. In our view, I probably have got up there social sector or social system agencies. Our definition of social sector or social system agencies are government agencies and non-government agencies. We don't see a difference in that respect. We're out doing a whole lot of engagement at the moment with providers, service users, and we're about 7 sessions in. It's been really interesting to talk to other folk about language, and a lot of providers I talk to, their definition, social sector is NGO, government is state sector, which I find fascinating. So even there, in such a simple term, we have a difference in language. But anyway, our view, social system, social sector is government and non-government. So we're here to support the social system, invest better in what works. We do that a number of ways. I won't go through all of that, but really demonstrating the value of using data and evidence and technology to improve decision making. So we are demonstrating from some things, but we're also building some things that will be available to all agencies to use to understand whether and to know whether they're making a difference. And so what I'm going to talk about today with the social housing is a really nice example of that. We're trying to develop a method, but we want that method available for everyone to use. So, how will we know what works? And this comes back to what I was saying. I mean, evidence of the impact of social investment, of social interventions on the wellbeing of New Zealanders really does sit at the heart of the approach, whatever you call it. But those of you, in fact, a number of you will know that wellbeing outcomes are really, really hard to measure. Often people will say to me, does X work? And you can be really safe if you don't know to say, well, it's a bit mixed. Because often it is. Because if you think about the range of outcomes that we're seeking out of the interventions that we've got, you will see interventions work very well for some outcomes, not so well for others. It often is a mixed bag. And a lot of that really it's very hard to measure. And we often only have very limited qualitative evidence. Now, qualitative information is good for some things. It is not good for other things. We've got to be careful how we use it, or very limited proxy measures. So we need to improve the evidence base. And so what we're doing is, within the Social Investment Agency, is developing methods and tools, as I said, for anyone to use, so that actually, depending on what you want to measure, you can measure right around this circle. And as you can see, we've done some work, and I'll talk about that in a minute, around the fiscal. And so I think it'd be fair to say methods are most developed here. And that's also partly because, and I'll talk a bit about this, we've got pretty good data in this space. Data is always going to be a limitation. What we can do is often limited and only as good as the data that we've got. And our fiscal information is not bad. In the economic space, methods are partially developed. We're going to need to do a lot more work there. And we're starting to develop the methods in the wellbeing space. So what I want to do is talk about how that applies to social housing. So I'm not talking directly about the connection between social housing and social housing on children's wellbeing today. We're not experts in that area. There's also a substantial body of evidence and literature around this. And some of you will know it very well, I suspect. I just put this up here really to set the scene, just to understand that actually housing is critical for outcomes for children. We know that, for example, housing quality can have a direct impact on children. You'll see in a little minute that some of the work we've done shows that also it's really important for things like educational attainment. But I am going to talk about the social housing aspect. Right. So 2.5 years ago when we first set up, one of the first things we wanted to do was actually demonstrate the value of taking a social investment approach at the time. So this was a demonstration project. So what we did is we, as you can see there, we took a group of folk who had applied for and received a social house. And we took a group of folk who had applied for but did not receive a social house. And then we looked to make sure they were as like as we could get the two different groups. And then we looked at their outcomes, the different outcomes over a 6-year period. They were the data sources that we used. We did all of this in the integrated data infrastructure, the IDI at Stats, which gives us a beautiful, broad range of data that allows us to look across a multitude of outcomes. And we looked across, as I said, a 6-year period. So a short period, you can see some outcomes in 6 years. You do not see all outcomes in 6 years. And here's what we found. As a result of being in a social house, well, you can see down the side, the green bars were statistically significant findings. The others weren't. Still interesting. People in jail for less time. Children in school longer. So that brings me back to what we're saying to understand about the impact of social housing on children. And the one on social development, so spending went up. Now, my memory is a lot of that spend was into, for those of you who know the welfare system, tier 1 benefits, so your main core benefits, as opposed to your second and third tier assistance. So that's much more your hardship or emergency assistance. So you're getting people their correct entitlements at the core as opposed to having to then supplement. So my personal view, that's a good finding. And That was an interesting one around earnings. People earn less. That probably, we haven't really dug into these findings, but that probably is about thresholds around what you can earn to be in a social house. But it threw up some interesting things. Anyway, one of the things we learnt very quickly was, while this was a useful piece of work to do, and it did drive some action within government agencies, we really understood that what was missing was really understanding about what a social house meant for people's wellbeing. And so about a year ago, but over, we started the work around thinking about how we were going to measure change in an individual's wellbeing and in a family or whānau's wellbeing. So what we did is, like all good researchers, we went to the literature, we went and looked internationally at all the various wellbeing frameworks around the world. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of them. And so we did a lot of work around assessing, okay, what framework made the most sense for a New Zealand context? And where we landed, thankfully, was the OECD's Better Lives, I think it's called Better Lives, framework. If you're interested, go and have a look at their website. There's some really great information there about that framework. And so we took that framework and then we adapted it for a New Zealand context. So if you can read the slide, things like cultural identity we've added in to really, again, to give that much more New Zealand flavour. I said thankfully because some of you might be aware of the work that Treasury is doing around the Living Standards framework. They are also using the same OECD framework, so that's very useful. I mean, so what they are looking to do with that framework is measure change and wellbeing at the population level. So how well are we doing as a country, as a population? In the SIA, we're interested in how are individuals and families doing as a result of a government intervention. So they're different things, but we're using the same framework. It's not a direct line of sight, but it's kind of a wiggly line of sight, if you like. We can line some things up. So I think that is helpful. So what did we do? These are some of the questions that we wanted to be able to answer. I won't go through all of them, but we wanted to look at how the wellbeing outcomes changed before and after placement in a social house. So what we did is we linked in the IDI administrative data from Housing New Zealand about who was getting into a house, and we used cross-sectional survey data from the General Social Survey. I don't know if any of you have ever been a participant in the General Social Survey. It's a survey that's run every 2 years, broad range of questions around, quite subjective questions around how you're feeling about your quality of life and all sorts of things that we can't get out of the administrative data. So I'll skip to it for a minute, but what we've found is that survey data and administrative data are really nice complements that together they start to give us a much richer picture than administrative data can do on its own. I'll go off topic a bit. I've been in the starter space a wee while now, and when I first came into it about 10 years ago into Ministry of Social Development, it was all about surveys. Surveys are very expensive. They're great. They give you some things, but there are limitations. And then what I saw over the 10-year period was this great big swing to administrative data. Administrative data is really good as well, but it's also got lots of limitations. And so, but when you start to put the two together, you really start to get some magic in terms of what we can start to do to understand what's going on. So anyway, we linked that data. We could do that for the first time because General Social Survey results have only just gone into the IDI in the last 6 to 12 months. So we looked at people before they were in a house, and then when they were interviewed in the General Social Survey, and then so after they had been in the house. We looked at 5 measures of housing quality to understand the impact. So they were 3 self-report measures around, so this is people in the General Social Survey talking about their home, the physical state, whether the house was mouldy, cold, poor condition, and then a more subjective judgment about how happy they were with their housing. Then we asked some questions around rooms in the house, household crowding, so forth. We then supplemented that with another 11 indicators, and I've got a slide that will take us through those. So what we were trying to do is move beyond a very simple description of somebody's feeling of well-being to actually being able to measure whether there is a genuine difference. And I think the presentation's up on the website, so go and have a look if you can't and you're interested. So there are the domains across the right-hand side that were in that earlier slide, and then here are for each of those domains, here are the indicators that we looked at. And as you can see, the bars running to your right is where we saw improvements, bars running to your left is where we saw things not improve, in fact, get worse. The dark green bars are where the results are statistically significant. The clear bars are where they're not. So you can see for yourselves that overall satisfaction went up, satisfaction with housing went up, some housing conditions went up. You can see there that the house being cold didn't improve significantly. And we suspect that that's to do with that's not so much about the condition of the house, that's about income and your ability to pay electricity bills and things like that. Then we found a couple of interesting things you always do when you're doing research. People's free time went up, but people felt less safe once they went into a social house, and that finding persisted. I'll come back to that. So I'm just going to go back because it really is important. I have a lot of data folk in my team. The first thing they will do is always talk to you about the caveats. I don't tend to do that, but on this occasion I am just going to explain the limitations of this work. It's a very small sample size. Look, the work is still robust, but it is a small sample size, and we're doing some work at the moment to boost that sample size. I strongly suspect we'll find very similar findings, but we need to boost that sample size just to check whether that is the case. You can imagine there is a bias in the sample. So to be in the General Social Survey, you've got to be living somewhere for stats to find you to interview you. If you're not in the social house, you're a bit harder to find. And so finding people before and then after was a bit tricky. And I think there's some numbers in there about, yes, you can see that we were able to get, it was lesser numbers before and more numbers after. So we have to control for all of those sorts of things. Time frames limited. Look, we have a data in the IDI now for some areas goes back to 1994, I think, to today. So you can see you're going to, we're going to start capturing a generation very soon, but we are limited in how far out we can look at some of these outcomes. For those of you in the audience who are living in a data and evaluation world, this is kind of important in that we looked at before and after, not control and treatment in the same way we did with the fiscal work. And just to that last one, as you can imagine, to be in the General Social Survey, you're usually 16 and above, so we're not talking to children as part of that, but as you can imagine, children live in households, they are getting captured in those households. But just, there are important things to be mindful of. When I did this presentation in Wellington, I realised I think I had a few housing policy folk in the audience. I was a bit nervous. People were going to go off and do all this fabulous policy work on the basis of this, and I just wanted to caveat that. Not to say the results aren't robust, and they don't tell us something. The third one, couldn't see a lot of difference across those outcomes, education, employment and health, but really I think that's got a lot more to do with how far out we could look rather than anything else. You can see back to the fiscals, we did see some change around kids staying in school longer, for example. So the areas for further investigation, as I said, we could see a lot of conditions improve, housing conditions improve, but not temperature. So something we would look to dig into more. And then this one's really interesting. This is the feelings of safety deteriorating, and then, as I said, persisting. Again, sitting in Wellington in a data shop, we can speculate all we like about why that might be. Again, in the Wellington audience, there are a few people who work in the housing space, and they had some very interesting views on what that meant. And what I started to get a flavour of is that actually even geographically those views might look a bit different. So Auckland to Wellington, for example, I was hearing different stories about why this might be. This is also a really nice example to go back to why big data on its own is not valuable just in its own right. So big data will often tell you what's going on and where to go and look further, but it won't tell you why always something is going on. So this is a nice area where we go, okay, there's something going on here. if we want to understand more, then that's when you probably do need to go to your more qualitative space, providers, service users. What's that about, to really understand more about this finding? I think it's also a really nice example of where this sort of work can have really good policy utility. So it might be that actually getting a family into a social house is one thing, but it's also understanding what other supports might need to be wrapped around that family in the social house. For those of you who work in the space, you'll know that actually one intervention in isolation is often not enough. You need to think about the interventions in the round that you put around a family to really improve wellbeing and social outcomes. So, I think I have a slide which talks about the other findings which were of importance to us. No, I'll talk about them. So, as I said, what we're trying to build here is a methodology and a platform. We just happen to apply that to social housing. We're now going to start applying it to other interventions. So the findings about the housing were important, but the findings about what we found about the methodology is also important. So what we found was it is possible to provide a meaningful picture of wellbeing impact of a policy intervention across a full range of wellbeing domains. So what we've learned is we're on the right track. And in building the infrastructure to do this piece of work, this took a number of months for a group of very smart analysts in the IDI. But that's all been built now. So the next time we do it will be faster. The next time after that, faster and faster and faster. So we're learning, as I said, that we're on the right track. So, as I said earlier, we've also found that survey and administrative data are complements, not substitutes. So it's really important that we have access to those joined sets of information. The General Social Survey provides data that's just got no other equivalent in the IDI. As I said, it's starting to let us do things we could not have done before without it. We also have found that survey data could be designed better to take full advantage of it. And so, and this is, Stats have been doing General Social Survey for a long time. It's only as you really start to use the data, to use the results, that you can then go, actually, it would be more useful, Stats, if you did this rather than this. And so we can actually start to have investment conversations, because data is a very expensive thing to invest in. And it, has to fight against lots of other things that require investment. But now it becomes an evidence-based investment discussion, and I think that's very invaluable in its own right. And as I said too, we're now working with the Ministry of Social Development, and so we've applied this method to mental health and employment transitions, and that work is just about ready, I think. So our social housing work will be published over the next month or so. The employment work is not far behind, so we'll be able to talk about that very soon. And that's found, we've had some interesting findings there as well. It's got a bigger sample size. So one of the reasons we are starting to talk about this work is that we will only get this method better as we apply it to more and more interventions. So we're kind of out there now looking for partners. We're looking for people who would like to work with us to take this methodology and test it on something they are doing, because that's the way we'll embed, I think, the method into agencies, be government or non-government. So, other things we'll do is everything we do, we put up on our website eventually. It takes a bit of time to peer review all of this. All of our code, for any geeks out there, is published to GitHub, so people can take the code and play with it and prove it for us, let us know, and there's some of that going on. Over time, we plan to put up web-based insight tools, so we make this way more accessible. I'm just going to go back and do an advert for our engagement process. So as I said, at the moment, we're out engaging with New Zealanders on both data protection and use. We need to really build a better social licence around use of data in the social system. It has particular challenges. We need to get that better. We're also, at the request of the Minister, out there talking to people about the government's proposed Investing for Social Wellbeing approach. So we're getting some very rich feedback. We're on the road for 3 months. We're about 7 sessions in. And one of the things we are hearing loud and clear, and this does not surprise me, is that if you want government, NGOs to be doing more of this, then you need to help us. And that's not just a funding conversation, that's a capacity and capability conversation as well. And we really do see that as a key role of this Social Investment Agency, to be out there evening up the playing field, as I like to think about it, so we can all be in this space as we need to be. So we need to get the tools that we make available very, very accessible. So I might finish there. As Denise said, this information this morning kind of is hot off the press. As after the Wellington lecture, I did a radio interview. Somebody said they've already heard. That captured us a little bit surprised, and so we had to sort of scatter a bit and get ministers across this, because you don't ever want to surprise ministers. So it really is hot off the press. It is new for us. It's very exciting, but it's the beginning of what I think is a long-run game. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. My name's Julie and I'm a social researcher. And I want to ask two questions. One is, why did you go with the before and after rather than following the applicants as well as the people that actually got social housing? And the other one is, in the social wellbeing situation, where does hope and happiness live? Is it under quality of life?
I'll answer your second question first to say I am not, and I actually need to go and do this, so that's a helpful reminder for me. I'm not sure of all the questions in the General Social Survey that roll up to answer things like quality of life, but it is my understanding that asking people about their overall satisfaction with life takes you to that, how happy am I with how things are. So I think it is caught up in that particular question, but you probably have looked, but have a look at the General Social Survey questions and the sorts of questions that are asked, because there are a lot of questions asked and then they roll it up to get some of these sort of top line indicators, I understand. To your first question is, we just don't have enough data yet to do control and treatment, and we wanted to start somewhere, so control and treatment was going to prove really, really difficult. So we started with before and after. We know that's not enough, but on our long list of the next things to do is control and treatment, absolutely. But the sample size will be so small at the moment. We've got another wave of General Social Survey data has now gone into the IDI, so there's more data there. When we did this, I don't know how much you know about the IDI or even need to know. What happens is you've got data goes into the IDI and then it's linked, so records are linked on identifiers, and we got about a 70% linkage on the housing and the General Social Survey. We've now got that to about 90%, and so again that's going to boost our numbers. So as we boost numbers, absolutely control and treatment is where we need to get to. We started where we could.
Hi, Ian Leader with a PR agency called Local Works, excuse me, specialising in social innovation and good business. Really interested when your first, that's a fantastic presentation, thank you. What role do you see that business having in this? Because business in terms of social responsibility, I've noticed that they were absent in your first slide.
It's a good question, and one I won't answer very well, I suspect. We were, slightly long answer. So we were set up about 3 years ago. We only became a social investment agency a year ago. And in our early days, I'm going to be really honest, for my first 6 months, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what this thing was that was social investment and what we'd been set up to do. But as time went on, we started to become more confident. We started to find our space and we started to understand the impact that we could have and the right things for us to be doing. And so at that time, Bill English was our lead minister. And so we started our relationship with NGOs very early on. And so we've had those relationships right the way through. And from time to time, I'd say to him, are we ready to talk to business yet? And we'd agree that we had so much on our plates. We were sort of trying to find our way that we didn't feel we were quite ready, but over the last 6 or so months, I've had more and more business come and talk to us. And so I think we're getting very close, or we probably are ready, that I think business does have a role to play in this, and that's what they're starting to tell me. So it's kind of and I think the way we'll do this is probably through some of our strategic partnerships. So what we want over time. So at the moment we have, as I said, 6 with many in the wings, and we're at capacity. We're a small team relative for the public service at about 50 folk. And so we can't really cope with any more just at the moment. We're going through a big period of change as we stabilise our agency and so forth. But over time we need to expand. So we're starting to talk about our pipeline of strategic partnerships, and I want a variety of those partnerships. So Ones I'm particularly interested in partnerships with iwi, but also partnerships with business. What might that look like? So we've had some people come and talk to us about some ideas. We're just not quite ready to get there, but we will get there. Yep.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm interested in the aspect of, do the people who have provided the data to the IDI and also the social survey, do they consent for their data to be part of that? And I guess I'm interested in the ethics around whether or not people who contribute their information to something like the social survey, do they know that their data has been used for this purpose? And what's your ethical framework around that?
I think that could be one of probably the most topical question that could be asked this morning. So, as I said, we're out on the road doing this engagement program at the moment, talking to New Zealanders about data protection and use. The reason we're doing that came out of an issue that occurred last year. Some of you will be aware of it, when the Ministry of Social Development went out for very general purposes requesting service providers to collect information, and they weren't clear enough for what purpose. And that caused quite an issue. The Privacy Commissioner came out and made a finding on that said it was inappropriate. And so we were asked to go out and do a piece of work to really look at this issue around the ethics of questions like opt-in, opt-out, consent, transparency, communications, and so forth. So we're doing that at the moment. So again, things like the General Social Survey, there will be a consent there about the information being used for research purposes, because that's actually what surveys are usually for. And then there are general principles under the Privacy Act that allow you to use de-identified, so we don't know who these folk are in the IDI, and we really, really don't, to use information for research purposes. I don't think that's good enough. We need to go beyond that, and that's the work we're trying to do at the moment, is go out and really understand what information is collected for what purpose, under what conditions do we need identifiable information? Do people really understand what they're consenting to? Because I suspect people don't. I suspect most people will not know the work that we're doing with this sort of information. And if you think about the consent process for administrative data, is quite a long consent form. There'll be those of you in the room who will know this better than me. And there'll be a box about research purposes, but it won't go into, and we're going to research this, and this, because actually some of those things we don't even know yet. So on the road, what we are hearing is there are some really good practices out there around the collection of and use of information, but it seems what I am also hearing is that we are missing some ethical frameworks, government, non-government, for how we do this, and that's the gap we need to fill. So the engagement process is, we're doing the work at the moment. We're taking that back to Cabinet in November. They will agree some draft things, and then we'll take that out for more targeted consultation after that, and then it'll go back to Cabinet. They are then going to have to make decisions around, do we make it more mandatory that frameworks are introduced and are used, those sorts of questions. So it's an area that we are all very aware needs a lot of attention.
Why on this roadshow are you excluding academics from participating?
We wanted to talk to those people who are collecting information and those people who are giving their information. They were our primary audiences. What we have found as a result of being out there is that we've had interest from groups we weren't expecting, like academics, and so we are addressing that now. We're having a session here in Auckland, I don't know the date, with a group of academics who have expressed their interest, and we're doing the same in Wellington. So we've learned our way through this. As I said, we've got an interest we weren't expecting, and we are going to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, I was quite surprised that for a community consultation to explicitly exclude a group was unheard of in my experience.
So I guess we didn't explicitly exclude, and there are online surveys so we can capture the views of everyone. As I said, these were the audiences we particularly wanted to hear from, so that's where we focused our attention. But as I said, as we've learned, there is a broader audience and a broader interest, and we are going to bring that in.
Hi, I'm Trish Austin. I'm from the University of Auckland, so I'm sorry if I've been excluded, but I was invited, so I guess that's okay. and I'm also, by the way, a long-term member of the University of Auckland's Human Participant Ethics Committee. And when you were going through, I had some of the, I'm sorry, I don't know who asked the question, but some of the same questions immediately came to mind. So I do think you need to engage with looking at your ethical frameworks a bit. But my real question was to do with I know it's a small sample, and I understand, you've explained the reasons. But do you have any idea from your 132, the location? I mean, even city by city or parts of the city, does that get asked or collected? I'm worried about the one finding that you drew.
So we will know location. I suspect if you know the IDI, it gets to a certain point and then it zeroes out because the numbers are too small. So in some areas I suspect we will have the numbers because I'm going to say most of, because I'm not sure it's all of, the data in the IDI is geocoded. So we do have location information. But I suspect, you can imagine when you get to that size sample, some of that will start to zero out. I'm guessing now, and I can check this for you, I'm guessing in Auckland the numbers will be big enough that you could see, probably in Wellington, but after that it might zero out. Yep.
Okay, thanks. I'd be interested in continuing the conversation, as they say.
I can easily check that for you. Yep.
Hi, I noticed in your presentation you talked a lot about statistical significance, and I'm wondering if, as you get more and more data, there might be discussions about meaningful or important difference in terms of the service users or service providers. I'm from the health space, so we use clinically important difference. But in terms of, it's probably, you've got such small data at the moment, but moving forward?
Yes. I think there's a big difference, isn't there, about between being statistically significant. That's a very, a technical term. And one of the people who've worked on this, who probably led the work, he got very anxious when I changed the graph to take out the confidence bars, because for a general audience, they're not so important on the day. They get in the way a bit, but actually, technically some of those things are important. But that can be different about what's critical and what's important to people in terms of what we are finding. Yep. The technical goes more to how much can you rely on these results? How robust are they? You could take another finding in there that actually is of far greater interest depending on the area that you work in. Yep.
Thank you, Dorothy. Beth Ann Martin from Methodist Public Issues in Wellington. I missed your talk in Wellington.
Oh, thank you for coming up.
Could you elaborate more on this decline in safety? You said there were several possible interpretations of that.
So only as much as what people have told me. So I can't elaborate from the data because that doesn't tell us. But one of the women in the audience in Wellington, she does some work with Wellington City Council, and one of the things that they were getting consistently reported was people getting clothes stolen off their clothesline. So things like that were making them feel unsafe. I had another person feed back to me that in Auckland, where you've got a number of social houses all in one place, just that you might have, and so none of, this is all anecdotal, I've been told, so you might be living, in a very overcrowded house somewhere, but then you come into a social housing space where actually there's a lot of social houses around you, and so you've got a lot more complex issues going on that sort of contributes to a feeling of not being safe. So it's only anecdotal what I've been told. We don't know from the data exactly why that is. And we haven't done any qualitative work ourselves.
Kia ora, Dorothy. On that measure, you've said it's a deterioration in the level of safety, but I don't understand how you would have got that measure from the General Social Survey, because that's a snapshot survey of 8,000 people, 132 of whom were in social housing, and they had to have been in a place for 6 months. So you would have, presumably the surveys asked, do you feel safe doing these things around your neighbourhood? but that's not making a comparison to if they felt less safe at another time when they had a different living situation. So I can understand how you might be able to say that people in social housing feel less safe in their neighbourhood than people who aren't in social housing, but not that their safety has deteriorated over time.
Oh, perception of safety. And if I didn't say that, I should have. It's their perception.
That doesn't change it.
Yeah. So two things. One is, and I'm sorry, I've mucked up the slide, so I can't take you back there. But and you probably can't see it from back there anyway. You're right, it's a proxy. And the actual question is about walking alone at night, I think. So you're right, we are making some assumptions here. You're absolutely right from proxy measure. And we need to keep testing those. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is this is better information than what we've had before, and it allows us to keep asking more and more questions. Yeah. And also, can I also say that, I've taken also a snapshot from our much longer report that those of you really interested, I do encourage you once it's published, go and have a look, because we do expand on these issues far more than what I've done this morning.
Yeah, well done on the presentation. I'm interested in that point about collaboration with agencies and social services, and indeed with academics, because I think there's a need to set up a greater amount of contestability about this debate, to engage with the notion of what is to be a profession, and how a profession collects and uses data and what scope they've got within organisations to challenge the content of what their experience is when they perform their services. So I think there's a lot of professions out there who load a lot of data into computers and so on, and there are a lot of citizens who fill in forms and fill in their census and so forth. But then we don't necessarily find the environment to contest and to penetrate the implications of what that data is. For example, a lot of those staff who have loaded the data into a computer at work aren't in a position to do the analysis of that data, and they're in fact somewhat frustrated in their inability to get into that and even to present findings which might run counter, for example, to the agency's core purpose, which is that we're actually not performing the service we think we are. So it's an area of challenge and contestability, and I think the vitality of what you're doing here is that we encourage that contestability to expand and not to contract. And I'd just like to have your comments on that.
Thank you. I think the contestability issue is really important, and I'll take one component of that, and I'll go back to the academic comments, which is, so when I came into this space 10 or so years ago in MSD, I can only talk about MSD, so I had the data evidence analytics shops at MSD, the research shops, and our relationship at that time with academia, if you like, was really, really poor. It was quite a standoff. It's improved. Has it improved enough? No, it hasn't. There is so much work to be done in this space. There is not enough capacity in government, non-government, that we need more and more partners in the space, including academia. Our contribution we want is simply to make what we do transparent, as I said, by putting it on our website, by putting the code up. So people, I don't think there's enough peer review of the work that government agencies do in this measurement space. And there aren't, as I said, I know most of the good measurement folk in Wellington. It's a small handful. It's not enough. And we need others looking at our work, peer reviewing it, improving it. Yep, we're going to get some things wrong. We're making some assumptions. So we need others looking at it. And the only way we can do that is get it up there. We've figuratively got broad shoulders, and we need that peer review to occur. One lesson for us was when we did the fiscal work, we did exactly that. We put the work out very widely for peer review, and it got slammed, which was really hard for the team, but they got used to it, and actually they worked together with some of those who had given feedback, and they improved the work, and so it got improved before we then issued the final product. But even that you could go into, and even now 2 years on, when I ask questions of the data, they're going, we didn't look at that, we didn't know that. You can improve all the time. So we do need more people looking at this. We're one very small shop.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hog the questions. Hey, I guess one of my concerns around this, and it does speak to the capacity around the analyses, is you're presenting this as a causal analysis. You're saying that...
Absolutely not. And if I didn't make that clear, this is not a causal analysis.
Well, I guess the assumption is moving into social housing has those outcomes that you put up. And it's a before and after analysis with all the caveats around that. I can give you an example in the youth space, because that's my area. We have boot camps in this country, and I bet if we did a before and after analysis of boot camps, you're likely to get similar sorts of positive results. However, when you do the rigorous sort of controlled study, you get quite a different picture, and this is part of the problem. I think that this needs a lot more critique. It needs to be a lot more nuanced in how you present the findings, and again, I think it needs an ethical framework and structure for that, because otherwise, no, in this case, it obviously is a social good, but in the case of boot camps, which is current government policy, actually the harms outweigh the good. And unless we are critical of data being presented, people don't understand those sorts of issues.
Look, thank you, and I don't mean to be defensive, and because your feedback is useful to me, because feedback from Wellington is that I did beef up the caveats in this, because some of that wasn't clear. There's more to be done, and you're right. And if I've implied it, I certainly didn't mean to. This is by no means a causal analysis. It just isn't. What I'm saying is it's the beginning of moving from straight description, which is not good enough to start moving us towards could we ever get to causal, but it's the beginning of that process. It is certainly not there. No, and if I gave that implication, I certainly didn't mean to, and my apologies.
Thanks for, thank you for your presentation. I did find it really interesting. One of the interesting points that I found in particular was around the fact that you can get someone into social housing and all looks relatively good, so there's less mould, less this, that, but in fact it's not warmer. And we're going into winter, so I'm really interested in how, as a result of this particular survey, how might you influence policy around getting houses warmer?
It's a good question, because somebody I used to work with has always said to me, insight's not particularly valuable if you can't action it. So it's all well and good for us sitting in the SIA. We're not a service delivery agency, doing all this lovely work. If we're not influencing and embedding that into the places where they can make the policy decisions, then we're not much further on. So we have been talking to Housing New Zealand. As again, it comes to the comments at the back of the room, we've still got to be a bit careful about what we're finding here, because it is so early, but we are talking to Housing New Zealand about what we're finding and how we might work with them to sort of, one, hand over the results, but also work with them and then start embedding this. So if you go back to the idea of social investment, investing for social wellbeing, yet we need to understand what works. So that's fine, we need to measure, but the next step's on about, okay, that's great. How do we then embed and get the findings used? It's kind of, part of that journey.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a really interesting discussion. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for coming along here today, and I appreciate you giving up your time. But most importantly, to Dorothy. So I think that you've been incredibly generous, both with your time. You've done a range of interviews, so people might see you on different media as well over the next few days. But you've also been really, really open. And the key takeouts for me have really been about that shift between the social investment and the investing in social wellbeing, and that it's very, very encouraging to hear that it's not a narrow focus, that it's not only about big data, and that it's not just about the fiscals or financials, and I think most importantly not top-down single agency. So I think that's been very, very encouraging. I'm glad that you answered our question, and we're excited by our question about government and non-government, so thank you. And we're happy to call ourselves part of the social system. And the case study itself was very interesting. So the findings, as you say, while not causal, but actually interesting and thought-provoking around safety, have certainly been ones that we've been looking at and thinking about ourselves. So thank you very, very much, Dorothy. Let's all give her a big round of applause. And you talked about coming to hear Carmel Sepulone, and she's on the 21st of July here in Auckland. So I do encourage you to do that. There's still some really other interesting, really good speakers, and they're in your folders. But have a great weekend, and thank you all for coming along.